Hi, I'm Vic Chopra.
And I'm Spencer Oberg.
We are the co-founders of Unincarcerated Productions.
This is Unincarcerated, the podcast.
Here is our host, Cameron Collins.
You might be asking yourself right about now, what does it mean to be unincarcerated? Well, at Unincarcerated Productions, the belief is that it means to be liberated from imprisonment of any form and empowered to realize one's highest potential. On Season 1 of Unincarcerated, the podcast, we are going to sit down with each member of the Unincarcerated team and learn about what brought them to being part of Unincarcerated Productions and where they see Unincarcerated going. This is Unincarcerated, the podcast, Season 1. On this episode, I sit down with Spencer Oberg, the co-founder and CEO of Unincarcerated. A successful entrepreneur and accomplished speaker, Spencer spent 8 years in prison. His experience with the criminal justice system taught him that we have much to learn about how to successfully deal with crime and other social issues. From this, he developed a passion for informing public opinion on criminal justice reform. Here is our conversation. Hey Spencer, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Cameron. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Still living through our COVID times. How about you?
You know, there's no way that I can complain, man. It's amazing how fortunate I am throughout this whole crazy 2020 experience that we've had so far. So, you know, there's a lot of crazy shit going on in the world that when I see it on the news or when I stop to think about it, it blows my mind. But it equally blows my mind with all that going on that I'm as fortunate as I am. So I've got no complaints, buddy.
That's great. That's a really positive attitude to have, I think. It seems like maybe you're as busy as ever right now.
I am actually. If I'm honest, I'm more busy than before COVID. You know, I've got one of my companies that I'm a partner in, Good Planet Foods, and we just closed a significant round of funding, about $12 million. And we're, you know, in hyper growth mode. We're bringing on another executive to our executive team. And then we're bringing on a couple of vice presidents and some other staff. So, you know, I mean, we're not quite doubling in size, but we're, you know, time and a half over the next couple of months. Plus, our distribution is multiplying by about 6 or 7 times in the next couple of months. So, you know, it's insane how many balls are in the air right now.
Well, we definitely should talk about Good Planet Foods, and maybe since you brought it up, now's the time, and then we can circle back to more about you. But what is it?
Well, Good Planet Foods is a plant-based cheese company, and we focus on making the best allergen-free everyday use. So like mozzarella's, cheddars, that kind of thing, everyday use cheese in the market. And it's a company that my partner, David, and I operate together. He started it, brought me on like the first month of operation, and we've been grinding ever since. And it's really taken off in the past year. And it's, you know, the plant-based category as a whole is just exploding. COVID has actually made people more aware of what they're eating, where it's coming from, and honestly, less inclined to eat animals because of, you know, where some of these viruses, in particular the coronavirus class of viruses, originate from, which is, you know, some animal consumption in animals. So our category has grown even more rapidly than it was before, which is kind of mind-boggling. So yeah, that's what we do. We make cheese for people who don't want to eat dairy to be able to enjoy the cheese experience.
Well, I can tell you personally, I appreciate that, being vegan for almost 10 years now.
That's so awesome.
It's good. That's the thing, is that there's a lot of bad vegan cheese out there, but within the last couple of years, I think that you've had a lot of high-end specialty cheese come in, and then what you're offering, and not that it's not high-end and good, but it's not marketed at that higher price point. It is an everyday cheese that you would just eat, as like if you were eating cow cheese or whatever.
Yeah, totally, man. And I haven't gone completely plant-based yet, but I eat way more plant-based than I ever have before. And I've been lactose intolerant for many years. So, you know, especially for somebody who grew up in a household where dairy was one of the main staples, like we had some form of dairy at every freaking meal, period. Yeah. End of story. And I think it just really became, you know, part of who I am and what my taste buds really enjoy. But my body had enough of it at about 18. I can't deal with it anymore. So I absolutely, you know, I love being able to have that experience back, the cheese experience. Because there's a lot of other good plant-based dairy alternatives out there, but the cheese, like you said, man, I mean, that was up until now with our stuff, it was really hard to find something that was palatable.
So you said that at 18 is when you really discovered or stopped eating dairy because of being lactose intolerant. Was it something that you had symptoms of before that and then made a decision at that point? Or was that something happen in your body, you think at that point, maybe going through puberty at some point or something, I have no idea the science, that suddenly you just couldn't process cheese anymore?
Well, I think it was more for me a gradual process
Hmm.
and a gradual, I guess, realization of what my body was trying to tell me. And I didn't stop eating dairy at that point. I started eating lactate.
Seems like the
I
normal
mean,
route people go.
yeah, because I didn't want to give it up. I mean, milk and ice cream and yogurt and cheese. I mean, those were all things that were just part of my daily diet. I guess I didn't really know how to eat without it. So I just started eating lactate to help with the symptoms. And I mean, for me, it doesn't take them away completely. It just makes them more bearable. And I did that for quite a few years. And really, I didn't actually start eating plant-based dairy options. There's a long story about the diet that is available in prison. And some of the protein that you can get, some of the only protein that you can get there is dairy based. It's milk, it's powdered milk, which is disgusting, by the way. You have to make a judgment call on which do you prefer, right? I mean, do you and when I was in prison, working out was a huge part of my routine, a part of my daily life. And I was in this, I guess, psychological school of thought where I believed that in order to work out and build muscle and all that stuff, like I needed to have some kind of protein. So it was worth I guess it was worth the pain of putting myself through consuming that for a while. So I didn't actually go dairy free all the way until probably 2 years before I got out, which is when the symptoms got really bad. And I just I couldn't deal with it anymore. It was so life disrupting and well-being disrupting that it didn't matter to me anymore. I just cut it out of my diet completely.
Was that hard?
Felt a lot better.
Hard to do since you didn't have a lot of other protein options?
Oh yeah, it was really hard to do and kind of expensive too, because the only decent protein options, like at least what I consider decent, which is like fish, seafood source, you had to buy on the commissary, which is not cheap. It's super marked up. And in prison, you only make whatever, $50 a month, pennies. You earn pennies, and that's what you have to spend on the marked up commissary, which is the only source of food that you can get. So it's a monopoly. I mean, it's kind of a really twisted system they got going on in there. Yeah, it was really challenging to find alternatives and to budget to figure out like how I was going to get what I thought were my protein intake needs and all that stuff met.
So we started talking about prison, but for people that are just coming into this interview, all they knew was that you are part of a plant-based cheese company, and suddenly we're talking about prison. So why don't we go all the way back to the beginning here then, and before everything that's happening now, you went to prison. Can you talk to us about kind of what led you down that path and what the process was like of getting to the point where you are first in prison?
Well, it started pretty young for me. I was an only child. I grew up out in a little town in rural Pierce County, Washington called Graham, which especially at the time that I was growing up was very rural, not a big population. And it also happened to be the meth capital for a period of time of the United States. So there's like the highest concentration of meth manufacturing going on there. And being an only child, and my dad working nights and us not really having a lot of time together or a relationship, I was subconsciously, I didn't realize this is what I was doing then, but I was looking for a male role model. I was looking for, somebody I could look up to, someone I could follow. And everybody around me that fit that bill were drug dealers.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what I grew up thinking was the thing that you did on the side in order to make money. It started when I was probably 13 years old, 14 years old, started using a little bit of marijuana. And then by 15, started using a little meth and started not just using those things recreationally, but also selling them on the side to make side money. And I also started working at a young age too. So I was working at about 13 or 14, started working a little motocross shop, was hustling weed on the side, going to school, somehow managing to keep this, I guess it was kind of a triple life, but double life anyway, going on. The straight edge kid with especially an extended family who is pretty straight laced, a couple of doctors in the family, didn't live in Graham, of course, but managed to keep that facade going that this is who I was, that I was the straight-laced kid getting 4.0 GPA and, having a job on the side of that. But really the job on the side that was bringing in the most money was the drug deal, the drug hustling. And I kept that up for quite a while. My first run-in with the justice system was when I was 16, though. I got a little too high on my own supply and had an argument that went a little out of proportion, and a couple windows got broken and stuff like that. So I ended up having to do some time in juvenile at 16 years old. And then I managed to stay away from the justice system for a couple of years until I was 18. And then I had another little run-in with the system. Some of the people that I was selling drugs to and getting drugs from were messing around with some forgery, some fraud, essentially doing some check forgeries. So I got caught up in a little sting that was going on against that, and ended up doing, I got a 50-month prison sentence, but I got what they called the drug offender sentencing alternative, which essentially you go through some treatment while you're in prison. You get half of your sentence suspended, except I guess suspended isn't really the right word. You do half of your time in prison, do some treatment while you're in there, and then you do the other half on community custody or probation when you get out. And I got really lucky, actually, because I only did half in prison, because there was some legislation that went on right around that time where any non-violent offenders who kind of got caught up in some kind of nonsense they got half off of their sentence. And one of those was me. So I did 12 months in prison, and then I did a couple of years on probation after that. And during that time that I was on probation, of course, I did excellent. I still hustled a little bit on the side, but it certainly wasn't anything like I had done before. And it was something that I guess I justified it to myself, because it wasn't hard drugs that I was hustling. I had gotten, right after I got out of prison, I'd started working at basically a heavy equipment body shop. And so I was working there right out of prison, and I got injured on the job. So they started prescribing me pain pills, and I took a couple, and then I was starting to feel better, but they kept prescribing them to me. And so I'm just like, okay, whatever, I'll keep filling these stupid things. And then it kind of dawned on me after an interaction with one of my friends, like, oh shit, like this is kind of lucrative here. I'm getting these things pretty much for free, and people are willing to pay a lot of money for them. So the hustle came back in, and I justified it because, I'm not messing with the hard drugs anymore. I'm not doing that. I'm helping people have access to a way to help them with their pain. Right. I didn't understand opiate addiction at that point. Yeah. I did a little later on, but so I justified it like I was doing something good. And the whole time I was having this little hustle on the side, making really good margins, I was working, and I got married, and I bought a house, and then I became a partner in the job that I was working at. So I was a partner in an automotive shop up in Issaquah, and just doing phenomenally well. And then on the side, I started doing, I guess it depends on the way that you look at it, I just started doing too much, I think is the best way to put it, because it went from, they were prescribing me some Percocets to some stronger Percocets to Oxycontin, to enough Oxycontin to kill a horse. And that was such a lucrative side hustle that, I got addicted to not only the opiates, but also the money, the fast money. And, I sold everything that I had. And then when I didn't have any more to sell, I was like, how can I get more to sell? And it turned into a pretty significant prescription forgery ring, which lasted for maybe a year before it completely caught up with me, and everything came crashing down and culminated with a raid on my house at 3:00 in the morning one day with like 8 different police jurisdictions and a tank parked on my lawn. Wow. Kicking in the door with automatic rifles and flashbang grenades. And it was absolutely insane, and definitely had a little bit of PTSD from that for a while. That's how it all came crashing down. And from that, I ultimately got another 17 or 18 felony convictions. Some of the convictions were things I didn't even do, but they were just things that the prosecution wanted me to plead to so that they could get the amount of time that they wanted. They wanted to make an example out of me, right? I'd been in and out of the justice system twice at that point, and I had been running and gunning on doing this prescription forgery thing and and slipping past, the law's grasp, probably more than 2 or 3 times, which I'm sure they weren't happy about. So they wanted to definitely make an example out of me. So ultimately, the story gets a little complicated here. In order to avoid them prosecuting my wife, my now former wife, for all the same stuff, because we were married, she lived in the same house, how could she not know? They made me plead to several things that I didn't do and take a sentence much larger than what I would have otherwise, what I think I would have gotten otherwise had I gone to trial. And I did it because at the time, she wasn't even a U.S. citizen. She was a resident alien. And if, in the United States, if you get felony charges, if you get just charged as a resident alien, you get some serious problems. But if you get any kind of convictions, you're really screwed. So, I took the plea deal and got sentenced in one county. These were charges out of 2 counties. Got sentenced one county to 76 months, which was nice. It was right in the middle of my range, which I think my range was actually the low end. My range was like 74 to 96 months in prison. So King County sentenced me to that. And then I went the next week down to Pierce County. And he said, looking at the sheer volume of your record, you got 25 felonies here over the course of the last 4 or 5 years. Like this is insane. And this is certainly not enough time. I don't care what your motivations were and if you've seen the light or not. So I'm going to give you 120 months. You're going to do 10 years in prison. And that was like I got slapped in the face with a 2x4. It was extremely disorienting, and I fought it. Like I didn't accept that that's how much time I got for probably the first year or two. Like I was going to beat that on appeal. He wasn't allowed to do that. It was a global resolution plea agreement. Like that means that both of the counties are like, they all are supposed to do the same, same time. And I did fight it. I learned a lot about the law. I did my own appeals. But that whole time, even though I didn't want to accept that I had that much time in prison, even before I accepted the plea agreement, like I had made a determination. I'd promised myself that I was going to figure out a way to live the life that I wanted to live and become the person that I knew I really am, and the best version of who I am. Because the way that I had been living, that trying to live that double life, always trying to hustle illegally, it hadn't gotten me the best results. And I realized that if I kept going that route, that it was going to end up either in a life sentence, and either a life sentence, what they call the life on the installment plan, just going in and out of prison. I'd already had this. That was my 3rd encounter of being incarcerated already in some form, or death. Right. I mean, I'd been robbed a couple times. I'd been shot at point blank. I can't explain why I didn't get hit. There's no, like in my mind, there's no real explanation, logical explanation as to why I didn't. So I knew that my life was going down a path that was irreversible at some point, and that I didn't want it to go down. So even while I was fighting the amount of time I got, I was still leveraging every moment of it that I could to do something better with myself. And the only way that I could figure out how to do that in that moment, like actually figure a tangible way to change, was to finish my education. I had started college a couple of times actually on the street, and coming from, an extended family of college graduates and doctors, I knew that there was value in education. So I was bound and determined to get my bachelor's while I was in prison, which turned out to be a lot harder than I thought it would be. And we're kind of fast forwarding a little bit, but I did manage to do that.
That's awesome.
It took me pretty much my whole 7 years incarcerated to get it done. But I did get my college degree while I was in. I did all of my own appeals, learned a ton about the law, and got denied. And really at that point had a very deep experience and personal realization that everything happens for a reason. And that, I'm here. Do I like every moment of being in prison? No. But is it up to me ultimately what I do with it? Absolutely. And so instead of pushing further on my appeals just to try to get out a couple years earlier, I stopped. I threw my hands up on that and invested that time into doing things that were positive, not only for me, but for people around me. So I started an entrepreneurial training program in the prison, because I didn't have that. And what I realized about myself when somebody had come in as a guest speaker to one of the volunteer programs, one of the volunteer college programs that I was a part of, University Beyond Bars, I realized that I'm an entrepreneur. That's not a bad thing. And hustle isn't a bad thing. I just chose the wrong damn product, right? Like, yeah, the margins are great, man, but that's not the right product. You have the right hustle, you have the right personality and demeanor for it, but you got to do something that's adding value to people, not that's hurting people. And ever since that kind of realization, that moment, I wanted to pursue becoming a successful entrepreneur, a successful businessman, but I didn't know. I mean, I had no clue how to do it, even though I was the minority partner in this auto shop before I came to prison. Like that didn't even click to me. Like that was a form of entrepreneurship too. But in that moment, I was just putting my head down and working my ass off with the potential for a reward for it. It just didn't click to me like that was entrepreneurship in one form. So I wanted to learn everything I could about it, but there was nothing that was offered in there about entrepreneurship. So I started something myself called Harness Your Hustle that grew into what is now Defy Ventures Washington, which unfortunately I think some leadership dynamics in that organization now, and also of course COVID. It's really hard to bring people in to teach anything into prison right now, unfortunately. So I don't think it's going so well. Yeah. But it had a lot throughout the tenure of the program and the different, the various iterations of it. It had a lot of positive impact on people and both people in prison and the people who were coming into the prisons. And that is the part that really hooked me. When I would see Fortune 500 executives, community leaders, government leaders, university leaders come in, be a part of, speak a little bit, be a part of our program, and be completely blown away to the point where they would break down in tears because everything that they thought they knew about convicts, about people in prison, about the incarcerated, kind of shattered in front of their eyes, right? And their paradigm shifted. And that's what really stuck with me and what I really wanted to be able to continue to recreate at some point, which is kind of where Unincarcerated Productions began for me. And while I was still inside, David Israel, my business partner in Good Planet Foods and in BFY Food Group, and also a part of Unincarcerated Productions, he had an idea for doing some kind of a show in prison. So we worked up doing basically a version of Shark Tank in prison. It's had, I guess, a lot of ideation since then, mainly due to physical constraints and how hard it is to get cameras in prison, because the powers that be don't want everybody to see what's going on in there. There's also very legitimate concerns about opening new wounds for victims. And that's something that, I'm very sensitive to. And it's definitely something that has to be balanced when we're telling people stories. But that's not a reason not to tell the stories. That's when Unincarcerated Productions started for me. And it was also the beginning of my partnership with David. When I went to work release, which in the Washington State prison system, some people, not everybody, some get the opportunity when they're somewhere between 6 months or less to their release date. They get to go to a facility in like a city setting, usually, where they're still technically incarcerated, but you get to leave during the day and go get a real job, not one that pays whatever it was, 40 cents an hour, but a real job in the community and start building a foundation and start making some money so you can hopefully transition successfully when you get out, get a place to live, have that income and a job, start rebuilding relationships. And I got to do that when I was about 4 months to my release date. And when I got there, I immediately came and started working with David right when he left his last venture and started what has become Good Planet Foods. So that's, I came in right at the beginning and was still technically incarcerated when we started this thing. And that's also when I met Vic, who's my business partner and the director and a co-founder of Unincarcerated Productions. He had his vision for what he wanted to do in media. I had this, the Shark Tank in prison thing that I was so in love with and bound and determined to do. And while we were working out one day, it just kind of clicked like, hey, you're a good dude. I'm a good dude. We like each other. I think we have a good dynamic. Why don't we go down the road of trying to start this thing together? And here we are.
It's quite a journey.
It is quite a journey. And I don't think about it that often. So, when I tell the story, and especially when I tell it from, I guess, kind of beginning to sort of end like that, it even surprises me. And I get that a lot from people. If I'm on a plane and somebody asks, what I do, usually it's just the cursory Good Planet Foods, or sometimes it goes into Unincarcerated Productions. And then there's, depending on how long the flight is, right? It's like, oh, wow. And how talkative the person is. But sometimes, it gets, after hearing about everything that I'm doing now, they push a little bit further and we get into kind of the origin of it all. And I tell some of my background, and they're blown away, right? I mean, that's kind of that paradigm shift, at least a mini paradigm shift. A lot of times that I talked about happens to a lot of people who go in prison. It's like that happens right in front of my eyes when I share my story. And I mean, I guess it's kind of a deep experience. I haven't shared it in a while. I haven't been on many planes, so I haven't taken it from start to finish like that for a while. And it's even a little surprising to me. It's mind-boggling that we're in July of 2020. The 15th of February, 2018 is when I was released from work release. So 2.5 years, a little under 2.5 years. I got out of doing a 7-year prison sentence, and now I'm leading a multi-million-dollar company and will continue to do that in some capacity moving forward. I'm blessed to have an amazing team. Cameron, you one of them, in Unincarcerated Productions, doing this very poignant, because of the times we're in, and important work of breaking down and shifting the collective consciousness around incarceration and the unincarcerated, which is the term that we've coined to refer to anybody who's been freed from bondage of really any kind, but specifically in our case, prison. But usually when you end up in prison, there's something underlying that, right? There's internal bondage, which was certainly true for me. It blows me away that this is where I am, hanging out in my corner office. It's not a fancy corner office, but it's I'll take it. Just came from a house that my beautiful girlfriend and I are remodeling, that we just bought together. I mean, it's kind of when we started this thing, when I said I'm super fortunate, that's what I'm talking about. 2.5 years out of serving a prison sentence that, a lot of times throughout those years behind bars, like I was afraid of whether I would be able to become what I wanted to be, who I wanted to be, and do what I wanted to do, because of all the roadblocks that do come up when you get out of prison, some of which were self-imposed and imagined, but a lot of which were real. The biggest barriers for me over the last 2.5 years, and really, I guess, even throughout my process of preparing to get out of prison, the biggest barrier has always been me. It's been my limiting beliefs. It's been my identification with the stereotypes and stigmas that have been generally held by society and that I internalized and embraced. I went to Greece on a business trip. David and I went to Greece on a business trip, literally 3 or 4 days. I think it was about 3 or 4 days after I got out of work release. And I mean, the whole time I'm like fighting myself internally, saying like, there's no way that you can do this. You're a felon. You can't you can't get a passport. Bullshit. Yes, I can. You can't go to the European Union, the EU. Bullshit. Yes, you can. There's no way that your CCO, which is a probation officer in Washington, there's no way that he's going to let you go. That one was a little harder to overcome, admittedly, but I did. And that was one of the things that put a chink in the wall, or, whatever euphemism, you want to insert there, but that helped me to break down the internal barrier, my internal stigma against my past and being a felon. That's really been the biggest thing that's held me back. And having awesome people in my life to help me recognize when I'm buying into that bullshit has been just extraordinarily helpful. David, we'll get David on here to tell his own story, so I don't want to dive deep into it, but he had he went to prison, had an experience with the criminal justice system from a very different background than me, and he didn't internalize the limiting beliefs as much. And so when he got out, he just hit the ground running and overcame a lot of those things that when you're in prison, it's like folklore. It's like, I mean, it's like common knowledge. Like, no, you can't get a passport. You can't travel. Like, I don't know who in the hell started that shit, but it's kind of common knowledge that that's the way it is, when really it's not. I mean, those things are born of misinformation and really, I think, of fear and of people buying into these stereotypes. So, having having somebody like David as a friend, a mentor, and a partner to first of all just be like, no, dude, I did it. It's you can too. Or even if he hasn't, like, no, what? There's only one that's going to stop you is you. So stop buying into that. That's been helpful, but it's still like I still fall into it to this day. It's humbling to, I guess, talk through that all and end up reaffirming that realization, I guess.
It seems that no matter what form Unincarcerated takes, whether it's audio, video, short form, long form, whatever, at the heart of it is that notion of shifting the paradigm, changing the way that society looks at those who are both incarcerated and, more importantly, have become unincarcerated and how they're living their lives. Can you talk a little bit more about how you are taking what seems like something that you do just by living your life and talking about it, and then putting it on a grander scale so that you can affect that change in more people?
Absolutely. And firstly, prison and mass incarceration it's a big problem in our country. There's roughly 2.3, almost round up, call it 2.5 million people incarcerated at any point in time. We have the highest incarceration rates in the entire world. And by last estimates, there's 70 million or so of us who have some form of a criminal record, which means we've had some, interaction with the justice system. And that's a big proportion of the population. So it impacts people, and it's impacting more and more exponentially every day. So it's a problem that we need to address. And I think it's a systemic problem. And the crazy thing is, so many people don't realize it. So many people don't realize that there's something wrong with the system. They stick with the stereotypes and the stigmas that have been perpetuated by society and media that says essentially that, if you go to prison, you deserve it. And not only do you deserve it, but you should be punished while you're there. And now you are really less than human because you can't be trusted. If you did it once, you'll do it again, and a lot of people don't necessarily even articulate it like that, but that's just kind of the feel, right? That's where these policies that thank God are starting to break down, but these policies that have been in place for hiring and for housing for so many years, that if you have a felony conviction on your record, whoop, we don't want you, which, okay, maybe past behavior is a partial indicator of future behavior. But what I've found personally from my own personal experience, and also my interaction and experience with all the people who I know and all the research that I've done, is that people very often, when they have an experience like I did of going to prison, do what I did. They change. They decide that the shit that they've gotten isn't what they want, and they want to do something different. And even though it's swimming against the current in prison culture, really on both sides of the bars, for both, the programming and the staff, and also the prison culture that's perpetuated by the prisoners, they change. They find a way to do something different, to build a foundation, to be amazing people when they get out. But they don't want to get out and share their stories necessarily, because that just creates more barriers for them, because people make those judgments. And yet, when people do share their stories, especially in all of my experience, so at least in the last couple of years, and in all of my friends' experience, every time we share our stories, we have a positive impact, not a negative. It helps to break down barriers. It doesn't pull them up, right? So the stereotypes and stigmas that people hold on to, that result in less opportunity for people with a criminal record, that result in no housing, no jobs, or which that's an overgeneralization. I should say a higher barrier to getting housing and a higher barrier to jobs, which ultimately helps perpetuate the recidivism, or people returning to prison cycle. So, like you said, what I seem to do just by sharing my story and by being myself is to break down those stigmas. And Unincarcerated is all about doing that on a grand scale, right? If we can tell stories that change hearts and minds, or whatever, whatever way you want to describe that, and do it in a way that's really engaging and hooks people so that they want to continue to watch, they want to continue to listen, then we can do what I've seen, happen right in front of my eyes on an airplane with the person sitting next to me. We can do that at scale. We can really help to shift the collective consciousness when it comes to people's opinion about formerly incarcerated or unincarcerated individuals. And in turn, that can help to change the system, right? Really change those systemic issues that I alluded to earlier. And I think it's something that we have to do, because the vast majority of engaging programming that's out there surrounding prison-related topics is over dramatized. It's exploitative because it basically takes the stigmas and the stereotypes and puts them on steroids, right? Think about lockup raw. Yes, those kind of people who are in solitary confinement and just deep into the criminal lifestyle, right? That is not the majority of people, at least from my experience, in prison. And the fact that there's so much of that type of programming that people consume, and they consume it. I mean, it is, I can't remember how many seasons Lockup has, but holy shit, the producers of that show killed it financially. But in my opinion, they did us and forgive me, guys, if you're listening to this, guys and gals, if you're listening to this, but I feel like they did our society a disservice because of its impact on people's perception of us, of the unincarcerated. It's about taking the hunger that society has to consume content that surrounds this kind of mysterious, societal issue of prisons, and feeding it with content that is, I mean, sometimes it might be dramatic, but that's more often than not just engaging in more positive ways, inspiring rags to riches from whatever, the gutter to the courtroom, in a positive way. As an attorney, I mean, I have several friends who come from just the gutter of society and have extensive prison careers behind them, and now they're attorneys, and they're doing what they can within the system to do something to affect change. I know many people who are successful business people. I know PhDs. I know professors who have been in prison, right? And they have incredible stories, so powerful and moving. And Unincarcerated is about taking those stories and telling them in a compelling way so that people are, they're enraptured by it. And at the same time, they're changed, and they're changed by the truth. We're not spinning anything or taking advantage of anybody's situation or exploiting people for ratings. We're just telling people stories that need to be told in a compelling way. And I think that can change the world.
So stay tuned for season 2 of the Unincarcerated podcast, where all those people will be on.
Exactly.
What makes Unincarcerated different? I mean, you've alluded to it, but how do you take for example, the Shark Take behind bars idea? How do you, as someone developing this idea for Unincarcerated, do it in such a way that you avoid those traps of being exploitative? Because it would be really easy to go down that route, especially if you're producing it with an outside television channel or production company or something where they're going to want to sensationalize it a little bit. They're going to want to make stuff that society will engage with in the way that it has been so that it makes money. So how do you keep that vision alive through the show? What would your ideas be for that?
That's a pretty deep question. And I think it's something that we're working really hard. And Cameron, I think actually you have a lot of value that you add when it comes to this part of architecting our company, Unincarcerated. But we're building the foundation of it such that the core tenets that we operate on prevent us from going down that path. Our core values are all about making sure that we keep our mission first and those values first, and the money will come. And the money's not to get rich from anyway. And that's the ethos of our organization. That's the heart and the spirit of everyone who is part of the core team and everyone who will bring on as we move forward or do business with in general. Like you said, partnering with an outside production house. I mean, yeah, that can be dangerous. If we sell something to Netflix, for example, traditionally they have complete creative control after that, and they can do what they want to do with it. But what sets us apart is we're not going to let that happen. If we do sell something to a big production house or a large platform like that, we're going to maintain ultimate creative control, so that, or at least veto power, so that the stories are told the way that they need to be told, and people aren't exploited and things aren't over sensationalized. The key is that they don't need to be. Right. And I think that's where people have gone wrong in the way that they've produced most of this type of content up to this point, is that for some reason they feel like it needs to be. And maybe that's just kind of our, what seems to be a common problem in the human condition, greed, right? You see a way like, man, maybe I can squeeze a couple million extra bucks out of this thing and, amp up the drama a little bit. Well, it was probably, if the story was told well and told truthfully, then it would have been successful anyway. And I think it probably would. I mean, the whole premise of why I'm so passionate about this is I think it'll be even more successful because it's real. People connect with something that's genuine. And now if it's genuine and dry, I mean, if we've got people on, with a blank background and talking in front of a microphone with horrible lighting and sounding like the Dry Eyes commercial guy, like, yeah, their story might be amazing, but yeah, I'm probably not going to watch it very long, which is why it's important to tell the story well and in a compelling way, and and really employ the art of good storytelling and really through the way these stories are produced. Like I said, that's what sets us apart, is that our core belief is that we don't need to dramatize any of that stuff, and that we're absolutely not going to. We're in this work because of the impact that we know it will have, and not for the money. The money is a result of the value that we'll bring to people, and we'll go right back into bringing more value, not only through our productions, but through other initiatives that we want to do, like building more programming for inside prison, building more opportunity for transition when people are coming out of prison, more opportunity to connect people with jobs and resources when they get out of prison. I mean, ultimately, hopefully, some real foundational justice system overhaul and reform.
So it sounds like, at least for the first part, you were in prison, you were driven by getting that appeal done. And it kind of was your raison d'etre almost, from the way you've described it. And then it shifted after that to coming out a better person. Was there always that drive and that clarity of what you wanted to do? Or was there a point when you first went in that you just felt lost and you didn't know what was going to happen, where you were going to go? I know you had some previous familiarity with the system, but nothing on that scale.
Well, it's interesting because I think it was a little bit of both, right? I mean, it was a very interesting dynamic because when I was in jail, and I mean, all of the charges were still coming in, they were filing more charges, felt like on a daily basis for a couple of weeks. That's when the first shift, I think, really happened. That was when, I knew deep inside, I knew that I wanted to do something different. I wanted to change. I wanted to become a higher version of myself, but I was completely lost in how to do that. And I was also completely lost in, what was going to happen. Right. I mean, there for a little while, they were talking about charging me with the RICO Act, which is organized crime. And for anybody who's unfamiliar with the prison term lengths that come along with that, that's a very scary thing for a 21 and turning 22-year-old kid to deal with. I mean, they're talking about the possibility of an amount of time in prison that is more than I'd been alive by quite a bit. Even though part of me knew that a lot of that was scare tactics, and that I was pretty sure anyway that any evidence that they had didn't support, the kind of crazy things that they were throwing at me, which I've since learned is a big, it's really how the justice system works nowadays. There's no way everybody who goes into the justice system with charges could go to trial. There are not the resources to support it. So part of the tactic is you get charged with something that is like unfathomable for you to deal with, and then offered something that is, by comparison, pretty easy to swallow. You don't want to do the next 45 years in prison, or you want to do 7 years. And with these charges, even though you didn't really do this one and this one, that's okay. It's called legal fiction, no problem. We'll just work that into the plea agreement. You'll get your time done and get out. That happens to a lot of people. Obviously, that's ultimately what happened to me. Didn't know all that then, but even though I had some kind of an inclination that what they're saying isn't really, what could happen isn't really possible, it was still terrifying. And I think it was part of the impetus for my desire to want to do something different. But the main part was I just wasn't happy. I didn't like who I was. I was not proud of what I had done, who I had become. I wasn't like, I couldn't look in the mirror and love myself. It took a while, and it took a long time for me to be able to do that, and a lot of focused work. But that was the real underlying driver for me wanting that change. And I made the decision then that I wanted it, and I was going to figure out how to do it. I was completely lost on how to. And yeah, after I got my, what I considered to be an exceptional sentence, which is kind of a legal term for a sentence that's above what the standard range is for your crimes, which was definitely the case, and how outraged I was at the injustice of that. And I mean, that's a rabbit hole in and of itself. Although some of it still rings true, I own everything that I did that was wrong. And it was, even then, I was more than willing to pay the consequences for that. And if that meant that I had to, part of paying those consequences was that I had to have some extra felonies on my record that I didn't believe I was guilty of, well, that's okay. There were some things I did that I didn't get charged with too. So that was kind of the way that I balanced it out in my head. But I was still like so against doing that extra 2 years. For some reason, I thought like it was gonna, for the first whatever year or so of my incarceration, I thought that was gonna like materially alter my future or something. So I was focused to a large degree on winning that appeal, but my resolve to do something better with myself was there, and I was actively pursuing it at the same time. Right about a month or two after I got to what they call my home institution, which is the prison I do most of my time at, I was introduced to, at the time, a very new and small organization called University Beyond Bars. And it was basically just a couple of people coming in, volunteering their time, trying to help guys get an education, college education. So I hooked up with them, and I was taking more than a full load of college courses, most of which none of us could afford to pay for credit for, but it didn't matter to me. The credit was part of it. I wanted the certificate, I wanted the degree, but what was more important to me is what I was learning, the growth that I was experiencing through it, the relationships that I was developing through it. And I did that at the same time as doing my own appeals, and then just dove into that and into self-betterment all the way with all of my time when I abandoned my appeals.
If there was something you could say now, sitting here, to yourself when you're sitting in that jail cell and they are throwing more and more charges at you, and maybe even into your process of trying to appeal those last 2 years, what would you say to yourself?
It's not worth it. I'd sit down and have a real heart to heart and try to get my 21-year-old self to understand that when you get on the other side of this, when I was fresh out, when I just gotten out, when I hadn't really, except for my accomplishments while I was in prison, I hadn't really built a life out here to be proud of at all. I was still I was relying on my family support and all that. Even at that moment, I wouldn't have changed prison. I would not go back. I wouldn't have gone back and changed it. Most people think I'm nuts when I say that. And it does come with a little bit of a conundrum for me, because I think that even though my crimes were quote unquote victimless crimes, there were still victims, right? There were people who had serious drug addictions that I enabled. There were family members of mine that I hurt. There were friends that I hurt. There was collateral damage that I wish didn't happen, that I have remorse for. But I wouldn't be who I am today if it wasn't for that experience and for who I was able to grow into through that experience, through it. And I wouldn't change it at all. And, if I had to go back and do it all over again, knowing and having the choice, I can go down whatever other path, I would have or could have gone down other than prison, I would do it again. And it's really, and it's kind of, I think it's kind of ironic that I'm sitting here and I'm saying it was, essentially the best thing that ever happened to me, but I still have kind of a problem with the prison system as it is and with the justice system as it is. And I don't think that those two I'm searching for the best words to use. I don't think that's a hypocritical statement, right? Because I think that there's certainly a place and a need for prison of some form. There's certainly a place and a need for a justice system, and through the one that we have now, flawed as it is, I was able to become the next stage or the next level of that higher person that I want to be and I want to continue to grow into. And that has just reaped enormous rewards. I mean, not only can I look at you and tell you that I love who I am, I can look in the mirror and tell myself that I love who I am. I've, been able to rebuild phenomenal relationships with family that my grandparents in particular, I don't think I ever would have had the opportunity to do otherwise. And that almost makes me want to start crying, because that's how important it is to me and how important they are to me. But mostly that relationship and those experiences and those connections that I just never would have had with them otherwise. And of course, the beautiful life and impactful life that I get to live now, like it wouldn't have happened. I wouldn't be who I am. Wouldn't be where I am. I wouldn't be as fortunate as I am. I wouldn't be getting to work with the amazing people I get to work with. And just so I would have told I would have told them all of that, and then just said, forget about the damn appeal and dive in deeper sooner and take every last second of opportunity that you have while you're in here to become everything that you can be, to grow as much as you possibly can until it's time for the next stage of the journey.
Unincarcerated, the podcast, is a joint production of Unincarcerated Productions and Grindle Industries. All of the music on today's episode, including what you're listening to now, is from the artist Speculation. You can learn more about Spec at speculation.bandcamp.com. That's spekulation.bandcamp.com. We will see you all next time.